This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 574, Runaway Metaphor. For Monday, January 6th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. The cries to break up big tech have grown louder over time, and many have vigorously debated both the positives and the negatives. But what if in the end it doesn't matter what we do? What if we simply can't put the genie back into the bottle? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, Alibaba's plan to grow through social selling, understanding serial project relationships, getting creative with gamer products, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal consultant of the idea integration company, Mr. Saul Colt. Saul, Happy New Year.
Thank you, Bob. Happy New Year to you. Happy to be here.
Now, and joining him is the principal partner of Emotive Technologies and the Best Scoring System, Mr. Marc Whitehead. Marc, how are you?
I'm excellent. There's nowhere I'd rather be on the first podcast of the first decade, the new decade, than on my favorite marketing podcast. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely. And we've got a big topic to talk about right up front. Politicians, pundits, tech experts, they've all been climbing on the bandwagon to break up big tech. I mean, you hear it in the Democratic nominees or the contenders talking about it. You hear it in the European Union. Everybody wants to break up big tech. But has the genie already left the bottle? And that's a serious question. A series of articles in Forbes and other publications tackled this exact issue this past week, arguing that surveillance capitalism is here to stay. Marc, there was a great example of that. If you broke up Alphabet, that's Google's parent company, the first thing YouTube would do would be to build a better search engine, and the first thing Google would do is to build a better video platform. So does it achieve anything? Does a breakup simply push the problem further down the line without addressing the core issues? What's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I think this whole topic of surveillance capitalism, this is my new favorite word for 2020.
I know, it's great.
It's great. And as I was doing a little bit of homework for our chat today, I was surprised to hear or see that it's been around as long as it's been around. It's actually a term that was coined in 2014, I think. But I've only just become familiar with it in the last little while. So, and this is a topic actually in different incarnations that I think we've discussed before on the show, Bob. And I bet it could probably become a weekly segment because I don't think there's any tidy solution that gets rid of it anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like this topic comes up over and over again, and it's always debated in the context of, is it good to break up the big tech companies? Is it bad to break up the big tech companies? But it was an interesting nuance to talk about, like, what would it even matter in the end if we broke up big tech?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just like, they've already established surveillance capitalism as a thing. It's going to continue whether we break them up or not.
I think you're right. And, I remember back in the good old pre-internet days of conversations about breakups like AT&T, that breakups were all about busting monopolies and encouraging competition. And, I think that's still
Hey, Saul, could you go on mute? Saul, can you go on mute for a little bit? You were just sniffling a little bit. But go ahead, Marc.
No worries. I was just going to say, that's still an argument for Alphabet and Facebook, but I think today's examples are about fixing issues that are beyond monopolization and competitiveness. And the core issue, I think, with surveillance capitalism, this term that I've come to both love and hate as I've investigated it, is that it isn't about stimulating competition as much as it is about keeping people from embracing the good of an online channel without full knowledge and acceptance of the downside. It kind of reminds me of the evolution of tobacco advertising. We'll still sell it to you, but we're going to plaster the cigarette box with warnings and nasty deterrent images. So for me, in my opinion, marketplace dynamics are not necessarily served by breaking up the tech and platform companies of today, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I think the examples that you reference about the steps that Alphabet are going to take with Google and YouTube are correct. But I think there are three things that are the most likely contributors to changing the landscape of this new term, surveillance capitalism, and they aren't about breaking up companies. First, there needs to be a user-led change of consumption or expectations. Then second, there needs to be some kind of competitive alternatives that need to come to the market that actually directly address the shortcomings of the current players. Or thirdly, you need government regulations that are forcing change in a different manner than simply breaking up companies. Now, for the problem with the first two options is that I've seen little evidence that the majority of users of YouTube or Facebook or any other platforms actually see a problem with the status quo. They either don't understand or maybe they don't believe there's an issue in providing personal data in exchange for access to content, entertainment, or anything else that's of personal value. And I know, like, I got off of Facebook years ago, and I continue to send notes to my wife and my kids, and they read them, and they kind of nod a little bit, and then they go right back to it. So I think the third option, government stepping in, I think that's where we're about to see some potential for this in a whole new way, starting in California with this newly enacted Privacy Act that actually took effect on January 1. And as I read it, there's still a lot of gray area for me about exactly what it means to be in compliance with this. I think it's CCPA. But as I understand it, it's supposed to act like a new layer of consent to online interactions. They want to provide residents with the right to know what data is being collected about them, what's sold, giving them a say in the sale or deletion of it, as well as enabling the access to that actual collection data. And I think, in my opinion, this will be the first opportunity to see if the government intervention can help solve the issue by encouraging changes in user attitudes through better awareness, and then also kind of setting the benchmarks for more transparent provider behavior without resorting to forcing the breakup of anything.
So I'm going to come at this from a different approach and say it's too late to break up any of these companies because the way they're designed, it's not like breaking up AT&T and just saying telecom and cable and whatever pieces they broke up there. Every asset in this company relies on each other to actually keep it going. If they weren't crawling our Gmail accounts, they wouldn't have the AdWords to serve us. And if they didn't build search, YouTube wouldn't actually function as the second largest search engine in the world. And if they didn't have, their AdWords, they wouldn't have places to put it on YouTube and all these things. So it's not so easy and simple to break it up because they all rely on the same data pool. And, they may look different. One's a video platform and one is this and one is that, but they're all going out for the same database. So unlike Marc, I didn't do any homework for today's show, so I don't have these fancy, pundit-like data and examples. But I'm telling you, like the notion that if you were to split them up and YouTube would build their own search engine is ridiculous, and vice versa. They would just partner with each other because without that unified data pool, the whole thing crumbles. Like they're all feeding off that one beast in the middle, and it's just got the 8 arms of the octopus or however many arms for every thing they can do. But this company and current companies are designed very differently than old enterprise companies like an AT&T or an entertainment company or a telco, because they literally can't live without that that basis foundation of data. So I don't even know where you'd start to break them up.
Well,
And
here's
okay, go. I'll finish after.
Yeah, here's something to consider too, and just to add more fuel to the fire on surveillance capitalism as a thing. It's different than other businesses mainly because it doesn't really provide anything of lasting value to the consumer. I mean, yes, we get our interactions with our friends. Yes, we get an access to news and information about our lives or the things we're interested in. But ultimately, it's not like the telephone company, which provided a specific service to landlines around the country. It's just like it was an opportunity to connect with people, but it was a service that we were paying for. And, it was the competition between different companies was what drug it into disbanding it or breaking it up. It wasn't based on the same structure as a surveillance capitalism type company is, which is essentially the user is not the product, the raw materials. I think that's something one of the articles said. It's just like it's with raw materials being used in the process of generating the real business, which is to other companies that are trying to sell to people. So it's so insidious the way it's structured, and so quite frankly brilliant the way it's structured in terms of its ability to make money. I don't see it ever going away simply because it's just so well structured. It makes sense.
And I buy your argument, Bob, kind of the way you framed it. And Saul, I completely understand, although I the way that you talked about it, in my opinion, is sort of from Alphabet's perspective and not the user's perspective. But the curious thing for me is, why are people still talking about these new companies and the need to break them up if you are both right? If there is a new reality, if these companies are different types of companies that rely on one another, whether they are completely and directly enmeshed in each other, or were they acting as partners, as separate businesses? Why do the politicians keep clanging about trying to break up these companies? What's the point?
So I would say, one, it's a great headline. Two, they see the amount of revenue that these companies generate. So there's a massive amount of wealth going to a smaller number of people, and it's not the common person that's going to benefit from these people. But I also think the thing that that I'm most interested in, and by interested I mean scared, is, and one of the articles reference this, is that these companies know so much about you. So I talked a lot about Alphabet or Google or whatever the kids are calling it these days. But there was a mention of something that Bob and I have talked about many times, but that 2012 experiment where Facebook purposely pushed experiments just to see if they could really mess with people's moods and bring them down, bring them up. And they did a 61 million person experiment. They called it social influence and political mobilization. And they wanted to see if they could, by holding back some happy pictures and only pushing sad news in your feed, whether they could really manipulate your mood. And from a government standpoint, that's pure propaganda. And if anyone should be doing it, I think the government probably says we're the only ones that should be able to do that. There is so much control and power of people, never mind, money and everything like that, by 3 people, 4 people. It's crazy. We literally have I'm going to coin a term here. I don't know if anyone's used this, but we've got a digital dictatorship right now, whether we realize it or not, because there is half a dozen people in the world that could literally change the mood of a country. And that's never happened before. And that's got to be something that everybody's afraid of. But, from a shallow standpoint, I think a lot of these politicians are looking for headlines, looking for spotlight and stature, but they also don't really understand it. So if they don't understand it, it has to be bad.
Well, here's the thing to consider. I think you're both advocating for increased regulation. Am I right in hearing that from both of you?
Well, the right kind of regulation. I think it's not about breaking up companies. I think it's about managing what they can and can't do, and doing it in a more transparent fashion.
Well, but here's the thing. If regulation is the way to go and the people who are enacting the regulations aren't savvy enough to put together or put forward any kind of salient ideas for how to handle it, I mean, how does this ever get solved? I mean, it doesn't seem like our governments are equipped to regulate these behemoths any more than... I mean, I think the only thing that they have power over these big companies is the ability to break them up through antitrust regulations. And if they break them up, it doesn't solve the problem. It's almost like they're trying to achieve something by enacting policies and by enacting programs that are just not effective in dealing with the real underlying issue, which is that surveillance capitalism is here. And if Facebook's not doing it and Google's not doing it, someone else is going to be doing it, because that's the genie out of the bottle. So how do you deal with it? How do you is it just...
Well, here's the thing that I'm kind of stunned that nobody has come to, and maybe it's just too complicated. Maybe I'm oversimplifying things. I know of a group of people probably about 10 years ago who were working on an idea, an alternative to Facebook, but where you owned your own data and you monetized your own data. And it was more like a Rakuten kind of a system where there was a sharing of that revenue or income that came in between the user and their own data and the company that was managing things. And I'm kind of shocked that nobody has stepped forward to try and use that model in a social platform to change the dynamics of that income, of that revenue stream, of that control of both the data and the monetization of it.
But even all that does is push money around. It puts the money in the hands of the users. It gives you control of who monetizes your data. But
I think it changes control to the person as opposed to the 6 people that Saul is talking about, or the government.
Okay, but the company that creates this new platform, they're in control now because they have your data. Whether or not people would gladly sell their data for a little bit of extra cash on the side, but there's still surveillance capitalism going on, and still that influence of your personal moods and attitudes and political preferences. I mean, there's all that manipulation that's still going to be going on. So it's almost like it doesn't seem like there is anything that can be done, and that it's really just a matter of the individuals out there taking a little bit of ownership on their own feelings and emotions and political ideas and where they're getting their news and how they're absorbing information online. And it's just grow up already and start doing things with an open eye to what's actually happening.
Yeah, as I said, out of the top, I don't think there's a neat and tidy solution.
Well, I've got a solution. It may not be the best solution, but we ban all ads except for mine, and we see how that goes.
Oh, that sounds good. Sounds like a good plan. Well, we're going to move on in a minute, and we're going to talk about Alibaba, because Alibaba came up with a really innovative way of dealing with social selling. They're basically going to invite people to become store owners. It's an interesting concept. We'll get to it in just a minute, but first, I want to talk about our sponsor. It's not too late. If you're still setting your 2020 media strategy, I can connect you with what is arguably the most responsive and lucrative technology-minded audience available anywhere. Because our sponsor, Artisanal Agency, is the exclusive representative for Twit.tv. That's the This Week in Tech podcasting network. Now, they have lots of great shows. I can go through many of them. I'm going to focus on 2 today because I have been listening to a lot of iOS Today recently. And iOS Today, it gives you so many hints and ideas about what to do with your iOS device, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad, even Apple Watch or tvOS devices like the Apple TV. It gives you so many ideas about how to make it more functional, more useful to you. Just incredible. Micah Sargent and Leo Laporte do a fantastic job of running down through the news of the latest apps that are out there, the latest hardware that attaches to your iPhone. It's really super interesting show. And then, of course, I always listen to This Week in Tech, which is one of the big granddaddies of the podcast world. Always interesting. It's a lot like this show. In fact, this show was modeled after the This Week in Tech roundtable discussion format. So I love that program. I never miss it. And I'm the kind of person who you can reach with your advertising on their platform. And that's just 2 of their many amazing shows, all of which are generating phenomenal results for their sponsors. Now, listen to these numbers. I've read these week after week all through the fall, and I'm going to read them again to you. 50 million downloads a year. That is a lot of people listening. 70% of that audience directly works in tech, and 82% of them say that they have bought a product directly as the result of a twit.tv ad recommendation. And remember, they are offering an actual live read recommendation, just like we do here, and they take that responsibility extremely seriously. Not anyone can advertise on Twit. They do a careful vetting of each sponsor so that their hosts can offer your brand a genuine recommendation, while you can relax knowing there won't be any brand safety issues about appearing next to somebody that you don't want to appear next to. Now, all I'm asking you to do is to reach out today to start your campaign on the twit.tv network. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more, or email hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Start your next podcast ad campaign with a show from Twit, and we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, Chinese online shopping behemoth Alibaba, I had to write all that down on my script to make sure that everybody understands what Alibaba is. I'm sure most of you do, but got to be careful. Alibaba is launching an interesting new initiative. They're encouraging their 693 million users to each set up their own online store to sell merchandise found on the Alibaba site, potentially opening up new friends and family markets to the tune of billions. Now, Saul, what are your thoughts on this move? And is the idea of turning your customers into commission-earning drop shippers, which is essentially what they would be, something Western retail might want to emulate? What's your thoughts on this?
So I think this is a super smart move for Alibaba, but I hate this idea for me or just for the general public, and I'll tell you why for both. So for Alibaba, they get to move a ton more product from their sites. They'll get a wave of new vendors, which are basically, just people literally just dropping orders. They handle the shipping, they handle everything, and they just slip off a very small percentage to the people bringing the orders.
Yeah, and let me clarify too for the audience. This is not trying to sign people up to have a store and then have to house their own merchandise. This is just set up a store, list products that are available on the Alibaba site already, and then start selling them to your friends and family. It's kind of like an Avon lady with technology. It's pretty cool. But go ahead, Saul. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So it's brilliant for them. It's a no-brainer. It's basically someone giving them free money to do what they're already doing already. The reason I hate this idea, and I hope it doesn't get adopted by sort of Western retail, the Instagram experience, or Instagram, where a lot of people do drop shipping as well as Facebook, but Instagram seems to be the more visual of the smart shopping. It's already starting to get a little too selly for me. So if you just add 10,000 more people trying to sell whatever, dog beds or, boner pills or whatever it is, it's going to really ruin Instagram for me. And I'm only talking about myself, but I think that's really the thing. But also, it's like, is this an opportunity for Amazon or Shopify? I don't know. But my big thing with drop shipping, and I think that, perhaps the Western culture is a little bit more savvy. Maybe they're not. But it is completely devoid of any customer service. If you ever tried to return anything that was drop shipped, it's almost impossible. For the most part, you can never find these people afterwards, because it's just a link on a Instagram. Then it's a bunch of Chinese caricatures in your PayPal account, and then something shows up maybe 4 months later because they didn't bother to tell you they're not manufacturing it until they get X number of orders.
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up, the lack of customer service. That would be a problem, but couldn't Amazon enact something like this and then add their customer service in a behind-the-scenes type of way? I mean, it would actually it would achieve all the objectives that you're kind of concerned about, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but does Amazon really want to do this? I see it. I see more like a Shopify kind of thing because Shopify has, X number of,
Well, right. That's why
million
they're built that way.
stores.
Right.
Yeah, they're built that way. But Amazon, I just think Amazon, because Amazon tends to copy a lot of the things Alibaba does. There seems to be a bit of a friendly, maybe not so friendly, sort of mentorship rivalry between Bezos and Jack over there. But really, like, does Amazon want to warehouse all this stuff? Does Amazon want to change their whole business model? They already have Marketplace, which is essentially kind of doing the same thing, except they don't have to warehouse it, although they do warehouse a lot of stuff at a pretty expensive cost for a lot of companies and stuff like that. So Amazon has sort of a hybrid model of this already, but I could be way wrong. And if you guys want to send me letters, send them to Bob at the BeanCast. But this seems to be really kind of more of an Eastern phenomenon because anything I've bought drop shipped in off of Instagram has come from China to begin with. So I don't really see it becoming a Western thing, but who's to say? But I think it's super smart for Alibaba. I hope this doesn't become a phenomenon.
So, Marc, what's your take on this? I mean, it seems.
I was just going to jump in and say I agree with everything that Saul said in terms of who wins and who loses. I think that another level of losing on the individual and the personal side, if in particular if this comes to the West, and I don't know how social media works as well in China. And in Asia, but I'm going to start second guessing every email and every reach out that I get from somebody on social media that turns into, hey, I can sell you something from Alibaba or Amazon or Shopify. I think if it's done from businesses that are using Shopify, I think that's one level. But if it's a personal individual who at one point you trust their advocacy to tell you what they should and shouldn't be buying and what's the newest and greatest thing, because they don't have a vested interest, to all of a sudden now they have a vested interest in doing that. I think that changes the dynamics of the relationships you have with your social media folks.
What if I set up just a hypothetical, what if I set up a BeanCast store? I put a section of my website aside, set it aside for listing products from Amazon or Alibaba or one of these e-retailers. And I made it a curated list of important products for the marketer, whether that was books or CDs or whatever. And I let people know I'm getting a cut of this, so I'd like you to shop at my store. That sounds like a complete win-win in the end, as long as they're getting the customer service in the end, as long as they're being treated fairly, as long as they're not having to pay more because they're coming through my site. I mean, it makes perfect sense for me to do that. What would be the downside of that?
I don't think there would be. I think that makes sense because that's an extension of your brand, and it's representing your point of view on what your show is all about. But
so what makes that
to my wife? But if my wife pops a site up and starts selling technology products, and I know she knows nothing about technology products, but she's doing that because she's getting a cut of it, that's when it gets dicey.
Right,
but isn't that the same as just setting up an Amazon shop? Like I've had an Amazon affiliate shop forever. I don't market it in any way. I haven't added any products in 100 years, but I used to just, it's like, I don't want to say his name, but someone who's been on the show often is kind of the worst offender of the writing a blog post and saying, people are always asking me which camera I use to take the picture in this blog post. And I guarantee anyone who ever says people always ask me which camera I use, no one's ever asked, but there's an affiliate link. Go buy it at Amazon and I get my 2%. And like, there's kind of nothing wrong with it, but isn't that really just setting up a drop ship thing? Like it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think it always should be buyer beware, but I think it's different in a buyer beware that I have a commercial relationship with you versus buyer beware that you're my friend on Facebook and now you're trying to sell me some stuff through Alibaba.
Well, I think one of the things that they've done in the structure of this, or at least what Alibaba has built, is this gamification of the process. There's only a limited number of products that you can list on your store at the beginning. I think it's like 10 or 11 or something like that. And once or whatever, 100 products, or say it's like 100 products, and then you can. And once you sell 10 products, then you open up to a higher level and you can offer more products. So there's almost like this self-selecting opportunity to see whether or not someone's a legitimate seller and doing things in a kind of above board way before you open up your entire product inventory to this individual. It also helps to sort out who's serious about it and who's just marketing to their friends and spamming people. It keeps it from getting out of control. I think that kind of solution makes a lot of sense. Does that change anybody's opinion about whether or not this is a good idea for a Western retailer?
Well, I think keeping it to 10 or whatever the number is just so somebody doesn't scrape their whole website and put it up and stuff like that, because there's going to be someone who's going to be savvy enough to do that. But it's interesting, and you sort of mention as a throwaway comment, this is kind of like Amway or Avon at the digital world and stuff like that. And I think it's very, we should mention that those are pyramid schemes, and they'll never give up sort of their stronghold because they need people to buy the inventory to keep the pyramid going. This is something very different than that. But I don't know. I hope this doesn't come in. You guys run with this.
Well, is this in the end just another form of affiliate marketing? Would you say that this is the same thing as affiliate marketing, or is it something that's substantively different and maybe a little bit more insidious? Because, Saul, you brought up that example of the unnamed person who's always spewing out affiliate links. I mean, and you found that distasteful. Is this even worse than that, or is it maybe a little bit better and more codified?
I think that they're telling people that they're going to give people the power to go into business. But is it really anything other than affiliate links? No, it's not. But they're wrapping it in a store. They're wrapping it in a different concept to give people more empowerment. But at the end of the day, we've got this list of things that you could sell to your friends and, grab whichever ones you think are the best 10 things and go sell them. So it's really not that different, except when someone says, I wrote a blog post and people are always asking me, blah, blah, blah. That's a little bit more deceitful because a lot of times people don't even, claim that it's an affiliate link. I think this way people can actually brand themselves. It wouldn't be personal. It would be kind of like, this is my store or whatever, it'd be more giving people the opportunity to seem like a brand, not a person.
And I think to that end, the way that it could be improved is if they not only enable you to sell products from Alibaba, and let's presume that others are going to do this, but they can actually teach you a little bit about the business. I think, more of a GoDaddy model where we're going to not just help you set up a website, but we're actually going to provide you with a bunch of resources to help you understand how to turn this into a meaningful business and not just something that you're doing off the side of your desk.
Well, another story that rose to the top this week was the rise of serial project relationships. Now, we've talked a lot on this show about how the move from AOR to project billing has been putting the squeeze on agencies who aren't able to plan and forecast the types of work that they're going to be doing over the next year. Now there's already a new model, the serial project relationship. Marc, we can guess by the name what this looks like. I mean, it's basically you're getting a whole bunch of projects on an ongoing basis. It's not like you're getting a retainer. You're just getting lots of project work, and you can plan on that. But explain to us whether this solves the problem for agencies, or at least moves us back toward better working relationships between agencies and brands. Is it doing anything for long-term health of the relationship there?
So my short answer to your question is that I think the agency business has a much bigger and more fundamental issues it needs to address than this.
Like, of course.
Kind of lasting value do they provide in the first place? But ironically, I actually think this move is a step towards that. So this term serial project relationships, it just kind of feels like a little bit of a buzz term. And I'm not sure that this is really new anyways. It just happens enough that agencies have decided to give it a name, and geez, I'm just waiting for a logo and a tagline to follow soon. Back in my BBDO days, I think distinctively of working on the Frito-Lay business, and the fellow who ran that business pushed everyone on the team on a regular basis. Every time we came out with a new plan or a new campaign, it wasn't just about, how is this going to be successful on its own merits, but how is this going to demonstrate learning from previous work we've done? And how is this going to provide measurable incremental benefits from the last efforts that we did? So in other words, he was coaching us. How are we demonstrating improved value every time out? And in a way, to me, that's what serial project relationships, that term, that's what it is. It forces the agency to demonstrate its value in an ongoing way without demanding them to repitch the business every year or two. And for marketers, it kind of helps to build some longevity into plans around staffing and resources and people who are involved in activities that are happening, while kind of tempering complacency in their agencies. So in my opinion, a successful agency should operate like it already and always has a serial project relationship, even if it has an AOR agreement.
Yeah, so the article I read about this, they kept dropping dating versus marriage kind of analogies and saying serial projects are more like dating versus things. So I actually think that's interesting in one respect, because I agree with everything you said, Marc. But it hurts less to break up with a girlfriend than it does a wife. And when you break up with a wife, you're dividing assets and things. So the agency version of that would be you're firing a ton of staff, you're throwing people out. I think this actually doesn't help with the relationship building, but I think it helps a little bit with the anxiety of both sides about, just like, how do you work together and what does it look like? And am I destroying lives if this thing ends? So, what you said, like every project, if being the agency of record makes people lazy because you get complacent, you take each other for granted, whatever. This is a great thing for both parties, because ultimately the agency should be always delivering their best work, and the client should have no reason to leave.
I like that idea of the dating situation, but it kind of feels more like marriage without a ring. We're really going down this rabbit hole of analogy here, so it's getting out of control. But I mean, you still have to share a lot of intimate details with that individual, that you're getting into a relationship with. And the same with a brand. A brand's got to open up the kimono and show their data, show their research, their competitive research, their information about the products. I mean, you have to get into that relationship in the same manner that you have to do when you have an AOR relationship. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be that easy. It's still not going to be that easy to break up, except that you don't have any contracts that say you have to stay there.
So let's talk about this a different way. How many times have we heard stories about an agency going in with their A team for the pitch, and then none of those people ever touch that client once the project is ever thing? They put a bunch of juniors on it or whatever. This probably holds the agency a tiny bit more accountable to actually live up to some promises and because like no matter what, you're still going to be signing the NDAs, you're still going to be sharing everything, there's still going to be all sorts of information going back and forth. But perhaps, and I'm not saying this is going to fix any of that, but perhaps if you promise that your three best people are going to work on the project, the three best people are going to work on a project. I'm sure we've all heard stories about the big box management consultants who their whole business model is to put 100 people on your account for the first 4 months, over deliver by 100% of your promise, get them to sign a 4-year contract, and then basically scale everything way back because that 3 months was just the dating period, and then they've got you locked in and stuff like that. Agencies kind of do a variation of that as well, and maybe this sort of calls them out on it.
Yeah, I can see that, and that's a really valid point. Holding everybody more accountable is probably one of the best benefits out of this. I just don't know that a breakup is all that easy whether or not you're married as an AOR relationship or whether you're just dating, which is this whole, serial project thing. I think I'm trying to create controversy where there is no controversy. We're all for this. Am I right? The serial project type situation. This is a good thing for the industry.
As I said, to me, it is what we should be doing anyways. To me, it's a practice. I think there's another aspect of this that is more maybe controversial, if you're looking for a little controversy, which is the client side of this. So this is assuming that this relationship is between an agency and, I'm going to say, the marketing department. But there are more and more companies who are actually hiring marketing entities in the same way as they hire ad agencies. So, I know of Hawk Media out in LA. Eric Huberman runs this, and it's one of the fastest growing companies in California. And they are basically pay-as-you-play CMO resources. And so companies are now, many of their clients are reconsidering the whole idea of the marketing function within their company, and whether or not they need to get a bunch of smart people who are kind of in tune with what's going on and are not just looking for a 2-3 year gig to bounce off somewhere else. And so I think there's a little bit of this whole sort of serial relationship going on on the marketing side of things within companies. That is another level of, or another example of this, that to me is more in its infancy right now and could be more interesting to watch than how it plays out for agencies. I'm
kind of wondering whether or not getting rid of this AOR relationship simplifies the process of interfacing with your procurement department as well. And that makes this whole situation a lot more friendly for the agency and for the client to actually get in bed together and have a one-night stand. Boy, this metaphor is just out of control. Yeah, but
I think it works both ways, though, Bob, because I've dealt far too much with procurement resources, and sometimes it's easier to deal with them once, and then you've got a relationship for a period of time, and you've got that contractual obligation, and really all you're doing is re-upping on a project by project basis with certain restrictions, versus having to tender every single opportunity, even though you know that you want to work with someone, and creating this false sense of hope from some resources that they can win it, and of a lot of work on a lot of different agencies' behalves to try and win a piece of that business. So I think I'm not sure that it's sort of cut and dried on the procurement side.
Exactly. That makes sense. Well, I'm going to move on to our final topic. We're running out of time, so don't laugh at this final topic. But Puma is launching new performance footwear for video gamers, which is essentially a $100 sock with a molded rubber bottom and it's just a sock with a molded custom sole. So, as ridiculous as this may seem, it's filling a very real comfort need in a very real and exploding market. So, Saul, with that incredible intro that I've just flubbed all the way through, should manufacturers be taking this opportunity to move seriously into this space, or is this just blatant opportunism on the part of Puma? And what's the total possibilities for people to enter in with products specifically targeted toward gamers?
So I'm going to cough 1 second. Excuse me. So basically, Puma's made a woven sock with a rubber bottom for esports pros. Two things that stand out for me here is the sock is called the Active Gamer Footwear. There's nothing active about sitting, drinking Mountain Dew, and playing Xbox. But that being said, these esport athletes, and I'm using air quotes, these people are getting rich, so why not make stupid, opportunistic things for rich people? The thing that I think is really interesting about this is you use the term gamers. They made it very clear in the article I read that these are not for gamers. These are for esport professionals. So how many esport professionals are in the world? Maybe 100 at this point?
Yeah,
We're
but
talking.
they're going after the gamer market with this. I mean, yeah, they're ostensibly it's like those $200, $400, $500 Nikes that are specifically targeted toward professional basketball players that every kid on the block wants to have. You know, it's the same type of market. You know, they're going after the esports professionals, but they're hoping to get the fans to say, "I want the same footwear that he's wearing."
So let me read you a quote from the article. I'm going to the glasses here. One of the most surprising things we learned in talking with esport athletes is that many of them take off their shoes when they're competing, explained Adam Petrick, Puma's global director of brand and marketing. Some players like to sit cross-legged in their seats. Some players find their feet get too hot on stage, and some players practice in their socks and simply prefer to compete that way too. In developing active gaming footwear, we realized that it was important to develop a product that provided sock-like comfort and flexibility while also providing just enough structure to be worn in those moments between matches. So these things are barely even supposed to be stood in. I don't know. I read the article twice to see if it was a hoax or like a PR stunt, but they're dead serious about this. I'm going to hold up my hands and say, okay, Boomer, I don't get it, because I don't get it. But I think it's ridiculous. Should we be developing things for new markets? Absolutely. If there's people willing to spend money, you want to be first to market, you've got something really going, that's great. But where do you even sell this product? Is it sold in Foot Locker? Because I don't think they're going to give up shelf space for something like this. Is it sold just online? Like, there's a lot of questions here I just don't get. And I realize that esports is a huge thing, but I think you're going to get a lot of people like really like, $100 for a pair of socks. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
What's your feeling, Mark? Are you on board with this idea? I mean, it seems like it's a well-targeted, well-thought-out exploration of a new market that doesn't exist right now, and they're creating a new market. That sounds like great marketing. It sounds like forward thinking. Am I missing something?
Well, first of all, I don't wear socks, so I'm not sure how much my opinion counts or weighs in here. I couldn't help but chuckle in the same way as Saul did in reading this article. But I think the acid test, just like with any, I remember when I was a teenager and we had a sports store, big box, one of the first big box sports stores up here in Toronto called Collegiate Sports. And they had a wall of shoes, and I didn't even know they made shoes for some of these sports. And the whole idea was, for me, was, how much was I prepared to pay for a pair of shoes that I will never wear for that sport, but that would just make me look cool at high school. And I think that will be the acid test for this. And if it really is something that, to your point, Saul, is barely wearable off of the carpet in your home, I'm not sure how much of a business it is. I don't know that there are thousands or tens of thousands of people who are going to pay this kind of dough to play Mario Kart at home by slapping these things on. I think it's more about the cool factor. I want a pair of Jordans because I'm like Mike and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think the ruling is out on whether this is actually a market that can transition into something like that. I agree that gamers are great influencers. I'm not sure that this is a product that they can play a big influential role in building a market around.
One of the things that bothers me about gamer marketing that's going on up until now is that we tend to look at gamers and say, well, we're going to market to them these items that are used in gaming. So you got a lot of hardware, you've got a lot of software, you've got a lot of those types of things being marketed to people. And then you have the assumptions about what this market is going to actually be buying. So you have pizza ads going to them, and you have potato chips, and you have soda ads, and all these other things. So those are the early entrants into the marketplace. But it seems to me there's so many more opportunities to look at the culture of the gaming community and say what products don't exist right now that we can bring in there. Now, maybe this Puma sock is a silly invention. I mean, it certainly seems silly to me. I may be proven completely wrong when this thing sells out by the truckloads, but there seems to be a huge opportunity for people to look at this market and start to think about how can we adapt what we're making, our clothing that we're making, our jewelry that we're making, our timepieces we're making, other types of devices that we're making, and start saying, how can we tailor this to a very burgeoning, very lucrative audience that is obviously growing? It makes perfect sense to me, and I'm thinking that most marketers are not really approaching gamers in that way. The only ones who are really approaching gamers are the ones that already have a connection to gaming. It's just like.
But the number one question that you always need to ask when you're bringing a new product to market is, what problem is this solving? And sometimes it's a problem that hasn't been identified, or sometimes it's a problem that you've discovered through your research. This article talked mostly about what I consider observational research. I didn't see a bunch of gamers saying, "Oh my God, finally Puma stepped up to the plate and made something that we've been asking for." It seemed more about this kind of opportunistic marketer saying, "Gee, we've observed these things and we think this might be an interesting market for us." I still don't understand what problem it's solving, and if that problem is big enough to make a market out of it. And I only have to look at, the behemoth in the footwear category, Nike, who decided to get into the golf business. And they had Tiger Woods, the most recognizable sports figure in the world. And they got out of the business 2 years ago because it just wasn't big enough and sustainable enough for them to stay in it. So I think time is going to tell whether or not this actually turns into the numbers that's required to make it a meaningful business.
So I would take that comment a different way and say Nike and Adidas are all over esports at a sponsorship level. So guys on stage are wearing Nike shirts and Nike things. They're not developing product for this because they probably know well enough at this point that with, subcultures like comic books and pop culture and video games and stuff like that, you have to earn your credibility first before you drop a product. And there may not even be a reason to drop a product if if people are just buying all their stuff because they support the community, Red Bulls and these type of brands. But Puma went right to the manufacturing or production stage without, I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact, earning some trust and sort of becoming the cool brand inside the space. They may have spent a ton of money just so these people could be like, oh man, but we're already all in on Nike and Adidas because they've been here for 2 years. So yeah. I just think it's an interesting.
Saul, you're making a lot of Saul, you're making a lot of good points, but you're breaking up.
I shouldn't say I guarantee you, but I'm going to make a prediction.
He doesn't hear me. Saul, you're breaking up. You might need to restart your app, but your point was heard right before it started dying. So we'll just let him restart. But
anyway. I agree. And I agree with him. I think you got to earn your credibility before you start to become the go-to brand in the market.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Saul. So. Well, with that, it's time for the fair, fail, foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug. We're going to try with Saul, make sure see whether or not your connection is a little bit better. But Saul Colt, you can find him at theideaintegration.com. That's the home of the Idea Integration Company. Saul, what would you like to promote?
I want to promote myself.
Okay.
If you guys need a, help with marketing, word of mouth marketing, we're the place to go. I'm the guy to talk to. Companies spend so much time just praying, dreaming, assuming that people are going to talk about their brand. But the truth is, people do not talk about your brand unless you deliver an amazing experience or you give them a real reason to talk about you. And we create projects, strategies, activations, anything that give people real reasons to talk about your brand. So if you want to talk, please reach out. My website is theideaintegration.com, or you can pretty much find me at Saul Colt, no space, anywhere on the internet. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and definitely you want to work with Saul if you have the opportunity. Next, Marc Whitehead. You can find him at bestscoringsystem.com. Tell us, Marc, what this best scoring system, it's an acronym, right? So you just let it go.
It is. It is. And I kind of introduced it the last time I was on your podcast a couple of months ago, but BEST stands for Brand Engagement Sentiment Tracking. For those of you who use NPS at all, Net Promoter Scores, we are an alternative, and I would certainly say a better version of NPS using the BEST scoring system with a couple of simple questions can give you not only some sense of a score that's related to the level of engagement that your audience, whether it's internal or external, has, but it also gives you the diagnostics around 16 different specific attitudes that are contributing to that score and how they are connected to one of two behaviors. Either they're going to act with you or they're going to advocate on your behalf. And so it is both a great diagnostic tool and it is also a great planning tool for understanding the things you need to work on to improve engagement with your brand. So thanks again for plugging the URL, bestscoringsystem.com. Come and take a look and give me a call if it sounds interesting to you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've been around this for a couple of years. I've watched you kind of evolve it. It's really super interesting, and I think it's pretty effective for people. So I highly recommend. As for me,
Thanks, Bob.
For more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it out at thebeancast.com. And if I can say one last thing, I just wanted to thank everybody who's given a donation to the show over the last few weeks. I really appreciate people coming out of the woodwork to show their appreciation for what we're doing here. We do have costs that come up in January, and it's nice to have some of them defrayed. So thank you so much. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair of the week. Now, I saw this and I immediately said, Saul, that this is going to be an award-winning ad. And this is going to clean up at the award shows. Now, I may be completely wrong about this. I mean, I often am when it comes to the award shows, but this BBC Dracula billboard was amazing. If you haven't seen it yet, it's basically a white billboard with a whole bunch of stakes with blood coming down from them, and it says BBC Dracula. But as it gets darker, a side light hitting the spikes becomes the shadow of a vampire lunging toward the logo. I think it's so brilliant how this ad just kind of evolves over time of day, and it kind of reveals a hidden message, or a hidden image. It's so great. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know when something's really great creatively when I get angry that I didn't think of it, because I looked at this and I thought it was one of the best, outdoor ads I've seen in the last many years. This was something really special. If you haven't checked it out, Google it. It's well worth your time.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a good thing, because the first time I saw a story about this, a news story about this ad, was not in the ad trade press. It was on Boing Boing. So, when Boing Boing has an image of it in a story before the ad press has it, it's got to be working effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fail of the week is going to Disney Plus. Disney Plus launched with a big differentiation that they own the content, so they wouldn't be removing content monthly like other streamers. But guess what, Marc? They started removing content due to previous licensing agreements. The Home Alone films were notably missing from their inventory after being on for a while. For me, this is kind of one of those dumb moments. Nobody's better at licensing than Disney. They should have known ahead of time that this line, this differentiation factor, was not going to fly before they started pumping it out everywhere.
Yeah, I think this is a really weird fail for that reason, in part, and also because, back when they released new movies, cartoon movies in the 60s and the 70s, and well before the days of the internet, they had a system, and it was upwards of 10 years where they would bring those old movies either back into theaters or through originally tapes and then DVDs. And there was an intention behind trying to keep demand fresh with each new generation. And so I just assumed, and I signed up for Disney Plus as soon as it came out, that was what they were intending to do here. So it wasn't a surprise for me that some of that content went away, because I'm just assuming it's going to come back later. But to not have talked about that openly and given people the impression that all of that content would be available all the time, when no other provider does that, right down to the Turner Classic Movies of the world, I think it was a missed opportunity for them, because I think in the old days they used it to their advantage to build fresh connections with new generations, and now they got egg on their face.
So I think they also have to spin this a little more interesting, because I read somewhere that all the Marvel movies, before Disney Plus was even an idea, they've locked contracts with streaming services for many years to come. So what is it? Black Panther will be dropping off in February or March of this year, and not coming back to Disney Plus till 2026. So they're going to have some real splaining to do, because it was like, this is the only place you can watch Marvel movies. But Black Panther, there's some deal. It was either with Showtime or Hulu or somebody that they locked it in, a long time ago. And there's going to be way more of these coming up until all the licensing agreements expire. And those things, they're not 1 year or 2 year deals. They're usually over several years.
Well, moving on to the foul of the week, Blue Buffalo dog food claims to be inspired by the diet of wolves, but one dog owner is suing them for damages, Marc, claiming that the food made her dog fat and diabetic. Now, in Blue Buffalo's defense, I'll say that, of course, there could be lots of factors to why this woman's dog is fat and diabetic, okay? So you can't necessarily just address it as a dog food problem. But it is pretty interesting when they started to go through the ingredient list that it has a lot of stuff in it that is not in any way part of a wolf's diet.
So I'm assuming that maybe the owner, their argument here was that they've never seen any fat wolves, and that's why they decided Blue Buffalo was the perfect food for them. And, I'm pretty sure, though, that wolves spend most of their days fending off predators, fighting for survival. Lots of reasons why they're going to stay thin that have nothing to do with their food. So, yeah, again, it's kind of weird that you would, the dangers of setting up some kind of an expectation, much like with Disney, with your customers around what inspired you to get into this space versus what are you actually putting in the food. And it's going to come back to haunt you if you don't have those things aligned.
Well, have something to have a suggestion for this list, or just want to discuss it? Comment online.
So that's the only on this.
Okay, Saul, someone's breaking up, but anyway, have a suggestion for this list, or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And we're ending this show just in time for Skype to completely disintegrate. Well, anyway, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
Cool beans.